Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Kirsten Wiley, and I'm here today to introduce and welcome Michael Specter, who is visiting us as part of the Microsoft Research Visiting Speaker Series. He is here today to discuss his new book, Denialism: How Irrational Thinking Hinders Scientific Progress, Harms the Planet, and Threatens Our Lives. In his book, he reveals that Americans have come to mistrust institutions, and especially the institution of science. Science today is viewed as a political constituency that isn't always in our best interest. In his book, he makes an argument for a new enlightenment, the revival of an approach to the physical world that was effective. And what that is what can be understood and reliably repeated by experiment is what nature regarded as true. Michael Specter writes about science and technology and global public health for The New Yorker, where he has been a staff writer since 1998. Specter previously worked for The New York Times as a roving correspondent based in Rome, and before that as the Times Moscow bureau chief. He also served as the national science reporter for the Washington Post, as well as the New York bureau chief. He has twice received the Global Health Council's Excellence in Media Award, as well as the Science Journalism Award from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Please join me in welcoming Michael Specter to Microsoft. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Those introductions are very flattering. They make me feel so old. I didn't actually do some of those things. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I want to talk a little bit about why I wrote my book, what's in the book, and some of the more controversial themes that I think are shot through. First of all, we may just begin with the title. Denialism is a word that is used by different people in different ways. I think we all know what denial is, and we go into denial when a truth is too painful to bear, and sometimes that's a very serious truth. You get fired, someone dies. Sometimes it's a little less serious. Your girlfriend dumps you, whatever. You do it for a day, a week. It's not terrible. It might even be a good thing. But if you don't get over it, it becomes a problem. And if society does it, that's what I call denialism. And when we do it on a grand scale, there are consequences, and the consequences are really very profound. And I don't really think people always understand what those consequences are. I should also say what I don't write about, which is two things that people often think about when they think about denialists: climate change and evolution. I write about climate change a little, but I don't write about evolution because I feel if you are a person who believes your ancestors rode around on the back of dinosaurs, I probably am not going to be able to have a conversation that you'll find useful. Climate change to me seems so overwhelmingly clear. The human involvement in what's going on Earth seems so profoundly well documented that I'm not sure that one chapter in my book could have added more than just another little feather to a giant stack of information. What I tried to do is write about some things that are a little more controversial, I think, and a little less well thought out by a lot of people. And among those things, we'll start off with one that people talk about all the time: vaccines. I wrote about vaccines as a bigger issue since I did this thing called H1N1 popped up, misnamed by the CDC swine flu. It could have been called chicken flu or elephant flu. It was a terrible mistake to call it that, but it's a new virus, and there's a perfectly good vaccine, as there is every year for a flu. It's the same vaccine that we always have. The only reason this was not folded into the normal vaccine is the virus came up 2.5 months too late. 46% of Americans say they don't want to have this vaccine because they feel it's dangerous. Now, this is really a little striking to me. I met a woman at a party recently, and she was pregnant. And I had written a little piece in the New Yorker about the vaccine, and she said, "Oh, you're the flu guy." I said, "Okay, I've been called worse, actually." She said, "Well, I'm not going to get that vaccine." I said, "Well, that's interesting, because you're exactly the exact person who should be getting it, assuming you want to take care of that child. She said, but I feel fine. So, you feel fine until you don't feel fine. It's like saying, I feel unpregnant until you don't use a condom and oddly get pregnant. I mean, these actions have consequences, and the idea that you could feel fine and that no virus would attack you, this was a smart woman. These are not know-nothings. And in fact, when we look at vaccine issues, we look at really well-educated, sophisticated people. Some of you may live on or have been to Vashon Island, one of the hotbeds of anti-vaccine activism in this country. Shameful, shameful anti-vaccine activism. There are 25 or 30% of parents on that island who don't vaccinate their kids. And why? Well, it all went back to a purported link between autism and measles shots, and then autism and mercury. We have studied both those links, as we should, because when you get, why would there even be such a link? Because when a kid develops autism, it happens almost always to be right around when he or she gets shots. And it's a terrible thing. And any parent, and I'm a parent, would want to try to have an answer to how this happened. So you look around you, and what do you see? You see an event that occurred. Well, just because an event occurred at the time that something else occurred doesn't mean that they're linked. And if I went to dinner last night and got violently ill this morning, you could conclude that it was because of the food, and that, in fact, it might have been true, but you can't assume that. With the vaccines, we have studied them in millions of children in more than a dozen countries. It's not that hard to study because there are lots of kids who've been vaccinated and lots of kids who have not. And in every study, you find the same thing. The number of people who develop autism in the vaccinated arm of a study are exactly the same as the number of people who don't develop autism. So how this can be related is mystifying. You have a problem?
Yeah. You meant to say the same as those that have not been vaccinated.
Oh, I thought that's what I meant. Yeah. Yes, it's the same. It's exactly the same in both arms of the study. So whether you've been vaccinated or not, you're going to have the same chance of developing this disease. And this is something that's been studied in more than 3 million children. It's not a sort of minor sampling. But it hasn't mattered. And one of the problems that I have is people sometimes think if you don't vaccinate your kids, that's up to you. And these things have consequences only for you or your children. That isn't true. And it isn't true because there's something called herd immunity. I have a daughter. If I send her to school and 17 kids in her class are vaccinated and she's not, it's fine because the herd will protect her. If 14 kids are vaccinated, it's probably okay. You get down to 12, you lose the herd immunity. It's sort of like when you go to a 4-way stop sign. If one car goes through it, it's fine. If 2 cars go through it this way, you're probably okay. But if it's this way, some dead people are going to happen. And this is absolutely what's happening. We are now seeing measles infection rates in this country rise, and in Europe rise. We're almost the only 2 places on Earth where that's happening. In Africa, in the developing world where 300,000 children died of the measles last year, infection rates are falling, vaccine rates are rising. We're having the opposite here, and it's shameful. It's just remarkable. Not only that, things that go away can come back. I got an email the other day from a college classmate who said, gee, I sort of agree with some of what you say, but I certainly wouldn't vaccinate my child against polio because we don't have it. Okay, we don't have it today, but it exists in the world. And I talked to a smart woman at Harvard named Marie McCormick who said, you have to remember that the longest flight in the world is shorter than the shortest time for an incubation of an infectious disease. So what does that mean? It means, say someone gets on a plane in Nigeria and they're infected with polio and they don't know that they are. And they fly to Chicago and they get off the plane. And they still don't know that they are, and the Homeland Security people haven't figured out a way to stop viruses. They're infectious, and you could get the disease if you're not protected. And the idea that that won't or couldn't happen because it hasn't happened is tragic. And some of the reason we have that idea is because we've been so successful at vaccinating people in this country that we don't even know these diseases exist anymore. But they do exist. And we've been taking advantage of a tool of science for a long time that we're now starting to walk away from. And it's the most successful tool in the history of public health, except, I would argue, for clean water and sanitation. And it's just something that we have to think about. So when we look at this flu thing, we say, why are people doing this? I think it's fear, and I think fear is just as infectious as any virus. I think it whips around as rapidly, and it's just as pernicious, and people hear from their neighbors, and they hear rumors, and they look inside themselves. They have their gut feelings. We all do. I do too. And the first reaction is, eh. But we need to get beyond the first reaction and look at information. And what I'm seeing again and again, and what I try to illustrate in this book, is that we don't do that. In one area in which I try to point this out is the area of food, and particularly organic food. There's no more unnecessary or bitter cultural war in this country than the food fights that are going on right now. It's ridiculous. And it's a battle between people who treat organic food as a religion and people who treat genetically engineered food as the savior of humanity. This is an ideological fight. It has nothing to do with science. It has nothing to do with food. It's about ideology. Because when I start asking people, why are they opposed to genetically modified food, they say almost always the same thing. Monsanto, 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 Monsanto. They can own the patents. They can control the plants. They will keep poor people from being able to plant things. Well, first of all, that is actually untrue. But let's say it's completely true. Let's say it's wholly true, and evil corporations are to be stopped. Is that a reason to walk away from a marvelous technology that can prolong and save millions of lives? Because it can. And if we don't let it, it won't. In Africa, there's this thing called cassava. It's like a potato. It's a bunch of carbohydrates. It doesn't have the nutrition people need, but 1 billion people need to subsist on it. And scientists, some of them in this neighborhood, are working to engineer nutrients, proteins, vitamin A, things that you go blind without and die without, into this very simple plant. And if you do that, you know, you're not going to have your vine-ripened tomatoes, you're not going to have Swiss chard, but you're going to have a food that won't kill you, and it will keep you alive. And that is something that lots of people actually object to. And I cannot understand it. But the vicious and vituperative assault on genetically engineered food is fairly unending. And I know this because I have an email address. So I should say, it seems necessary to say, I eat organic food, I buy it. I like it. I think it tastes better, though I've been challenged on that. But I do think it tastes better. I live in the West. We're rich. We can buy apples that cost a couple bucks a pound. It's fine. But that isn't the situation for most people in the world. 1 billion people go to bed hungry every night. And in 40 years, we're going to need 70% more food than we make on this planet today. Now, I think there's only 2 ways of making more food. You either use more land, or you got more food out of the land that you have. And if we use more land, we're just going to destroy some more rainforests. And I think we've already done a pretty good job of destroying a lot of them. I don't think that's the answer. There are other problems with food in the developing world besides agriculture. There's politics, there's water, there's roads, there's irrigation. There's a lot of issues of support. But it does very much depend on scientific utility. And we have that scientific utility, and we're not using it. And people make arguments like, we've assaulted the earth, we've used too much pesticide, we've used too much tilling, all of which is true. It's also true for organic food, too, not as much because those aren't used as much. We don't need to do that anymore. We don't need to do it that way. We can improve. We can make it better. And by the way, for people who are environmentalists, I've never understood why they run away from this technology, which has already shown that it can use less insecticide, less energy, emit fewer carbon gases into the environment, use water, which we're desperately in need of, more intelligently and sparingly. These are things we should embrace. And actually, some environmental organizations are actually starting to do that. The World Wildlife Fund is one. But my friends at the Sierra Club, think of these technologies as poison. And they're poison because they take us into a realm beyond which we exist now. But do they? It's a slightly more sophisticated way of mixing genes, and that's all we've ever done for 10,000 years. They didn't have cantaloupes and tangerines in the Garden of Eden. We made them. We blended things together over time. This is a more specific way of doing that. And that means that it's a more effective way. It also means it's a more dangerous way. There are risks and there are fears, and we should address them, and probably we haven't enough. But what I see happening over and over again is a group of people who will just look at their side of an issue, and they won't look at another side of an issue. And I'll just step aside and say, for some of you, you read this report that came out today or yesterday about mammography. New recommendations. People are very upset because basically new recommendations are suggesting that information that we thought was true a week ago kind of isn't. So does this mean that scientists lie, the government doesn't care? All these sort of conspiracy theories float around. How about this? More data came out. We had more information to analyze. We moved on. And that's what science is. That's what progress, that's what enlightenment is. We learn and we move forward. This is a complicated issue because it basically says to a lot of women, last week I told you were 42 and you should have a mammogram, but this week I'm telling you not. And that's upsetting to people. But what's more upsetting is to waste hundreds of millions of dollars on tests that could be devoted to cancer treatment and real diagnostics and better treatment. We need to focus on the things that our information tells us to focus on, not on the things that we kind of feel we'd like to focus on. And that's what happens, I think, in every area. It happens with vaccines, with food. I think this mammogram thing is an issue like that. And I also feel that when we look at drugs in the healthcare system, we see the same exact thing. I write about vitamins in my book, and I'm a pretty vigorous hater of vitamins. And when I say that, I don't mean vitamins in food. We need them. Got to have them. I mean all those health food stores that are everywhere that sell 93% of meaningless stuff that only serves to darken your urine. That's all it does. Now, not every vitamin. There are useful vitamins. Vitamin D. Got to have it. If you're pregnant, folic acid. There's some reasons for B vitamins for some people. But this is a spit in the bucket. If you look at antioxidant formulas, they're useless or harmful. These lotions and gels and elixirs and oils, they're ridiculously of no value. And we spend tons of money. We invest our energy. And why do we do that? So I think we do it for a couple reasons. And one is kind of like the Monsanto thing. Big pharma kind of sucks, costs too much money, doesn't really treat us the way we want to be treated. So we want something a little more nurturing, natural, real. And so we look at vitamins as natural and real. But do you know what you're swallowing when you get vitamin C? I mean, do you know who made it? Do you know how it was regulated? Do you know that 1,000 milligrams is 1,000 milligrams? Because I don't. I mean, maybe you have calibration instruments at home, but I do not, and I don't think most people do. These things aren't regulated in the way that they ought to be regulated. There's no post-marketing follow-up. There are with drugs. I write about Vioxx in my book. Vioxx was an anti-inflammatory that was introduced by Merck. It was a miracle drug for people with arthritis, except that it killed tens of thousands of Americans. So that wasn't so miraculous. And worse than that, Merck lied. They didn't tell people the whole truth. They acted as if there were no cardiovascular threats associated with this drug, and there were. And it was pointed out pretty early on, and they ignored it and ignored it. And in the end, the FDA estimated that maybe 55,000 Americans died as a result of taking Vioxx. That's how many soldiers died, American soldiers died in Vietnam. So that's a lot of people dying for reasons that really shouldn't exist. So I put that in my book because I think we need to realize that there are reasons for denialism that aren't just lunacy. People lie, authority isn't always to be trusted, and we need to be skeptical. But I put it in my book for another reason too, because if you look at that drug in a different way, you might come to a different conclusion. Now, millions of people benefited from that drug. And I'm not saying hey, so 55,000 dead, no problem. But what I am saying is there is a very specific risk profile associated with that drug. And we're sophisticated enough in this country to be able to employ that risk profile so that a doctor should be able to say to you, no, you can't take this drug because you had a heart attack, or your mother had a heart attack, or you have high cholesterol, or it's in your family, or you're obese, you have diabetes. There are tons of reasons, and they're not so hard for you or your physician to know. But when a drug is released in this country, it's like letting a bird fly free. Doctors can do whatever they want, and they do whatever they want. And we advertise it on TV, and turn on your TV and go 1 hour without seeing a Viagra ad. Send me an email and I'll give you $1. I mean, it doesn't happen, and I think that's wrong. And that was certainly true with Vioxx, which was the most heavily advertised drug in American history until Viagra came along. And what if we looked at it differently? What if we said, we're going to be rigorous about this. We're going to prescribe this drug to the people who need it most and have a low risk. Actually, they did a couple of tests on that. They did some studies, and what they mostly found is that if you don't have a cardiovascular risk profile that's dangerous, you have a 1 in 100, 1 in 150 chance of having a heart attack caused by this drug if you took it every day regularly for 18 months. If you took it for less than 18 months, you didn't even really have any risk. But 1 in 150. So now go to somebody with crippling arthritis pain who has trouble walking or doing normal things in their life that this drug can alleviate, and ask them if they would take the 1 in 150 chance. And I think you'd find a lot of people would take that chance. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't have yanked it off the market, but what I am saying is we needed to think about both sides of these issues. If we regulated cars like we regulate drugs, we would not be allowed to use automobiles in the United States, period. And by the way, 20,000 or more Americans are going to die in cars this year. We still use them. If every single American took 2 aspirin right now, 500 people would be dead by dinner. We still use it, and we should still use it. It's a really good drug. Everything has a risk. There's nothing that you do that doesn't entail a risk, but we only talk about one side of every equation, and they all have a numerator and a denominator. We talk about one of those numbers, not both, and it's really causing some tragic, tragic mistakes. So I would like to see us, here I'm going to get a little utopian here. We now face a terrible crisis in global warming, and there are lots of things we have to do, and we have to do them in a hurry. Vice President Gore has been running around here in the last couple of days. He says this stuff much more eloquently than I do. But the truth is, I believe it as much as he does, and I'm sure most of you do too. We have a crisis. How do you address the crisis? In lots of ways. One of the ways is by using the tools of science. We have synthetic biology now, the ability to create organisms from chemical constituents that can do things. It's very scary. I wrote a story for the New Yorker a little while ago about some scientists, including some at the Hutch here, who were bringing ancient, extinct retroviruses back to life. And that scared the hell out of people, because why would you do that? Well, you do it so that you could figure out how they work, so you can take them apart in an intelligent way and kill them. I mean, we have an AIDS epidemic on this planet for more than a quarter century, and we don't have a vaccine. It's really hard. This is an approach to a vaccine. None of it's a miracle. Single bullets aren't going to work for global warming, but we need lots of bullets. And we have some bullets in synthetic biology. We can now make, not scale up, but we can make gasoline, we can make a diesel fuel that doesn't emit carbon, that doesn't emit methane or ethanol, any of that, and we can power cars and power planes and power factories. We need to do it on a much greater scale. It's going to require a lot of energy and effort, but it can be done. But I'm afraid that it won't be done because people are going to do what they did with genetically engineered food, and they're going to scream about how this isn't tried, it isn't tested, we shouldn't do it until it's proven to be tested. Now, I think with genetically engineered food, we did just kind of unleash this on the world without having a conversation, and I think it would have been nice if we did. Let's do that now, because I don't think we can afford to screw around with this as much as we could with, whether America eats a lot of soybean or corn or not isn't as critical as whether we figure out ways to power our planet without destroying our planet. And right now, we're kind of fighting a losing battle. And I think we need to step up the game. And this is something that can happen. But it is threatening. And all those things you read about, Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, every creature, it's real. Craig Venter talks about, he's working on one of these organisms that will fuel cars. And he talks about booting up a new source of life. That's cool, but it's really scary. I mean, I'm not sure people want to boot up a new organism so readily because we're not really sure what happens after you boot it up. I'm not going to make any Microsoft virus jokes, but we need to think about those things. And all I'm really arguing for and asking is, let's think about them. Let's have a conversation about them. If we decide as a people that this is a greater risk than it is a reward, fine. But let's not just scream at each other the way we do about food. Because the food thing is ridiculous and it's endless. And I cannot believe that it couldn't be resolved by people just having a conversation. So that's where I'm going to kind of leave you, and you can ask me a lot of questions. I like to see people talk about these things. Look at your own intuition and ask yourself, is it really true? Why aren't you getting the flu shot? Why are you so afraid of genetically engineered food? Why are you swallowing all those antioxidants every day? I mean, what do you think you're getting? Just ask yourself those questions. And if you're happy with the answers, go with God. But I think those questions aren't asked, and I wish they would be. So that's me. So how do we do questions? People just scream?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, you skirted the edge of this issue a little bit, so I want to offer you an opportunity to speak more broadly about your views on alternative medicine, what that's doing.
Thank you. This is so thoughtful of you. I don't think that alternative medicine makes sense because when there's alternatives, you should try them out. You should test them against other things that are supposed to work or work as well as anything does now. And when those tests show effectiveness, they're not alternative medicine anymore. They're just medicine. And we should use them. I'm not saying don't try out new things. We should try out new things. But when we try out magnets and Reiki and all this crap, and it shows again and again and again that it does nothing, like homeopathy, let's say it does nothing. If we try stuff out, new plants, most drugs are derived from plants, try out a new herb, it works, let's put it in the cornucopia, let's prescribe it, let's be able to buy it at a reasonable price, not at a inflated price, and use it. But the whole alternative thing it's a kind of vocabulary that I don't understand, and I think we need to get rid of it. So I didn't mean to skirt that issue. I do have opinions. Yeah.
On page 17, you quote Einstein.
Come on, page 17? Yeah, okay.
17?
No, it's page 18. No.
Or science without religion is lame.
Yeah.
Why? What does religion bring to the table?
Okay, first of all, the quote thing means he said it, not me. But this is my view of religion. I'm not religious, but I don't think that religion needs to interfere with science. And I think a lot of people have asked me that question. Yeah, hyper-religion, creationism, fundamentalism of any stripe, whether it be creationists or any other type of, every religion has fundamentalists, they interfere. But I don't think faith, I know lots of people who have real faith, and I don't think that you need to either have science or faith. Tons of people have both. So I don't really see, if something makes you feel good, do it. I'm from the 60s. I mean, no, but really, I don't see these things as exclusive, and I don't know why so many people do. I think it's another kind of canard. So Einstein was right about that. I don't know about the theory of relativity, but he was right about that.
So, with the medical industry, I guess I've always felt it's a very opaque industry, and often what's told even to the doctors who have supposedly had loads of years of education is always given in such prepackaged advice that I'm often, I have actually gone against what the traditional medical wisdom in cases where, like I have, you're told not to give honey to kids under 1. And if you look at the medical research, it's almost everyone who could be affected is 0 to 6 months. And from 6 months on, it's pretty much only premature kids. But they tell you 0 to 1. And so when you start getting advice where unless you can ask some doctor to go get you the latest research, you don't really believe whether that applies to you. I sort of feel for the person who says, well, mammograms just changed from 40 to 50. that was from a statistical study on lots of people, but does it apply to my medical history
totally
of having
agree.
a mother who had breast cancer before?
Yeah, I feel for them too. I agree with you completely. And you said two important things there. One is you went out and looked at information and made your own decision. That makes you... Yeah, we don't do that in America, so stop that. The other thing is, the idea that we just accept wisdom from on high is one that I grew up with, and it's turned out to be disastrous in any number of areas of life, including, I think, medicine. But from Watergate to Chernobyl to just tons of examples, and I have them in my book as well, where we just sort of thought things would work out, and they didn't. And people lie, and people have their own agendas, and that's certainly true of medicine. It's just, and going back to the mammogram issue, I do understand why anyone is queasy or anxious about anything involving their own physical health. But how does a society come to a judgment on what to do? We obviously don't have enough money to do all the medical things we do, because we have tens of millions of people who don't even get insurance, and those of us who do often get substandard care. So given the fact that this is a finite group of interventions that we can employ, do we choose the ones that show that they're effective, or do we choose the ones that make us feel a little better about ourselves for a minute? And I think that's what this will do. I think, if you look at the data, it says move on. And it's not easy to move on, but I think you do have to do that, even with the mammogram issue. That doesn't mean it isn't difficult. It doesn't mean you shouldn't doubt or maybe even go your own way. But I so often feel that these questions aren't even asked or discussed. If you want to ask that and discuss it and then choose, I'm fine with that. But nobody does that, or I shouldn't say nobody, maybe in this room. But in general, people don't do that. So that's something I'm asking for. Because then it isn't denialism. It's a different thought process. And I'll take any thought process, really.
You talked about root causes, and fear seemed to be one that you were bringing up. The one that resonates more with me, though, is trust. Who do you trust? And it seems like we have gotten more and more information. It's gotten harder and harder to know who to trust. And even, how do you handle that problem?
Well, I think that you're right. That is a very fundamental reason for denialism. One is trust. I don't know, when I was young, my mother wanted me to grow up to be president. If my child grows up to be president, I'm going to punish her. I mean, people have different expectations and desires. We don't trust authority in the way that we did. And probably we shouldn't trust authority. So when someone says, take this, it's good for you, 30 years ago, you would take it and assume it was good for you. And now you probably think it's bad for you and that some company has some agenda. And probably somewhere in the middle would be a better approach. But the trust issue is a difficult one. Another one is information, and this is where the beloved internet comes in. Because the internet's made us all so much more, I think, intelligent and able to do much of what we want and never dreamed we could do. But you can find really excellent support for any lunatic fringe theory that exists on any subject in Earth on the internet, with great graphics and experts and links and all sorts of stuff. This is a pen. There's probably a web page saying, mechanical pens cause brain cancer. I'm not even exaggerating. So we have a problem, because you go on the internet to find stuff out, and you look on the vaccine stuff, and there's thousands of vaccine sites telling you how dangerous they are. And it's very difficult to know who to believe. I kind of think we're in a transitional period there, and that we're going to get to a point where there's some more trusted, and I think we're already moving in that way. I used to work for the New York Times, and people make fun of newspapers these days, but I kind of still like them. And one of the things they do that is the opposite of the internet is they curate the news. They figure out what's valuable, they decide, and yeah, they put their filter on it, and you may agree or disagree, it may be bogus or biased, but some intelligence has been applied to making a decision about information, and I think that's valuable. And I think we need to move in that direction, and we have. There are lots of sites, but it's a process, and we're just at the beginning of it. Yeah.
So economists have this idea of rational ignorance, where the cost of educating myself on the issue can be greater than the difference in benefit between the alternatives. And some of the issues you talk about seem to kind of fall into that category, where it takes a lot to educate myself on this, modified food stuff, and really the cost to me of, objecting strenuously is very, very low, right?
See, I don't think that the economies of those decisions are properly figured. It shouldn't cost a lot to educate yourself on the genetically modified food issue because it's amazingly simple. And we need to have conversations about that because for you, it may not be a big deal. But for society, it's a really big deal. And we're using tons of pesticide. We're doing lots of things with hormones and antibiotics in animals that we should not be doing. If you want to get rid of genetically modified food, by the way, just stop eating meat. Because most of what we grow that's genetically modified in this country is soybean and corn, and mostly we grow it to feed meat. And it's the most environmentally ruinous thing you can do on the planet, including drive big SUVs everywhere. So I just don't think that those things are that hard to learn about. Again, you may be right and I may be utopian, but I do think that A, we can learn about them, and B, you have to look in the broader way, because I think the costs of not learning about them are pretty devastating. They certainly are to Africa.
What do you think the role is of prospect theory in people not making decisions?
I'm sorry, the role of?
Prospect theory. Like the sense that you'll have an enormous loss. You value a loss more than you value a gain.
Well, I think that people tend to assign their own perceptional view without, nobody sits down and says, well, the data says this. If your kid dies, your kid dies. Or if your mother was in an accident, you look at the data in front of you. You look at the anecdotes. There are endless numbers of examples of people saying, I don't care what you say about vaccines because this beautiful little girl got a shot and then she got sick. And I completely understand that. I think it's human. I think it's both human for a parent, but also it's a sort of a evolutionary psychology issue. I just think that we, for the last 300 years, we've used the scientific method to great success. And we're all here because of it, and we're all prosperous. And when I say we all, I mean, they live longer in Bangladesh today than we lived in Boston 75 years ago. And the world has changed, and it has improved, even places where it needs to improve very dramatically still. And I think that's because of these things. So I like people to remember that and not walk away from it. But I acknowledge that personal perceptions are very difficult to overcome. Go ahead.
I can't find the New Yorker. I went down to Borders. And
now we're into some tragic stuff. Really?
It's not at Borders. I mean, I can't find the grocery store. I can't find it.
Well, first of all, I weep for you. Subscribe. It's cheap. It's great. It comes right to your mailbox. It sends my kid to college.
So, what about the use of teaching critical thinking?
We should do more of that, and we don't. I mean, one of the problems here is you can look even simply at math education, science education. In the mid-90s, we were kind of here. We were pretty high. We're not plummeting now. We're just kind of flailing. And if you look at India, China, Hong Kong, Singapore, you know the countries. Lots of them work here. Those guys are going like that. They're teaching it. They care about it. They understand it. We have given up on this knowledge, and I make a kind of big deal in my book about this. If you give up on knowledge, it goes away. There's no toehold that if you're an advanced society, you'll always be an advanced society. And there are lots and lots of examples where information has disappeared and societies that were advanced, particularly China 500 years ago, slipped into the dark ages as a result. I think that could happen here. There's no reason that can't happen to us, really. So yeah, we need to teach.
Let me touch on something that's related to a lot of the risk-reward things that you can ask me about. It's also related to current medical care debate. It seems to me that an issue that we don't want to touch at all, but is a real issue, is at some point we may be looking at cases where we know how to treat somebody, we know how to save somebody's life perhaps, and it's not worth the cost.
Death panels. Let's have death panels. No, listen.
How do we talk about
Well, we make those decisions in reverse now. The same way we make the decisions on vaccines by only looking at one side. We're killing people off all the time by keeping 85-year-olds or 92-year-old, I don't want to get into ages, it's really more outcomes, but people who have no quality of life, who aren't going to have quality of life, alive at costs of tens of thousands of dollars a month till they finally get unplugged. I mean, 90% of, or I don't know if it's 90, it's a ridiculously high percentage of the money we spend in American hospitals is spent in the last couple years of lives that kind of ended a couple years before. And yeah, that's a really difficult thing to discuss, but we are discussing it in reverse by ignoring it now. And that's why we're spending, really, that's the thing with the mammogram stuff. What's better? Should we spend the money on getting better cancer treatments or the mammogram? Should we spend the money keeping, a 91-year-old sick person alive, or should we take that money and develop a treatment for something that will make them live a better life when they had the opportunity to live a better life? It's been a big problem for a long time, and that is what's driving a lot of the healthcare debate, I think. Yeah.
I was curious if you had any comments about sort of creating false debate. I first heard about this, I think, in the Bush administration, but that you need two sides of an argument to make good TV. So you have all the scientists on one side, and you have some guy who has a blog in Iowa.
It's an amazingly apt question for a couple of reasons. I worked at the Washington Post a long time ago, and I covered the AIDS epidemic. And there was this guy from California named Henry Denialism. He was a lunatic right-wing congressman who was convinced that AIDS was visited on homosexuals because they were evil. So I can't remember the story, but there was some big AIDS development that I was writing about and, reported a front-page story. And I went to my boss, and I said, well, he said, are you done? I said, well, I haven't been able to reach Denialism. And he just looked at me and said, every story doesn't have two sides, which is a big thing to learn at a place that prides itself on balance. The idea, I was on a CBS Morning News show a week or two ago about vaccines, and there was me and Paul Offit, who's a very famous vaccine developer and writes about them very eloquently. And then there was this woman, Barbara Lowe Fisher, who believes vaccines are damaging. And she got just as much time as we did, because they took out a tape measure and said, well, they're getting 7 minutes, that she should get, and that's just crap. It is crap. It's ridiculous. So I agree with you, but we are sort of set up this way, and you see it with the flu, the H1N1. People were freaking out in the spring because it was going to kill us all. Then it went away, and why did we overhype it? Then it came back, and they're not getting the shot, and now we can't get the shot. And the same reporter writes all these stories. It's just... So yeah, that's a big problem, and the idea that we need to have we need to be fair. That's not the same as equal time to every side. Yes?
Related to that is, you mentioned that you can't really have a conversation with the people who think their ancestors rode around on dinosaurs, but right now a lot of those people have a lot of impact and authority.
They do. What I meant by that is, actually, I don't think they have as much impact as they did, say, before the last election. But it's not zero. My own personal view in writing this book is I don't think that I am sophisticated enough, eloquent enough, or magical enough to write anything that would move any of those people off the dime. So I actually possibly ludicrously think if I talk to people who are obsessed with organic food, some of them may listen to some of what I have to say. Same with vitamins. I know that some people have. Same with vaccines. I just don't feel that way about that. So yeah, it's true. It's an issue and it's not going away, but I don't know how to. I'm just not able to address it.
Maybe a good book by a dinosaur.
I have a dinosaur at home.
One more.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, we'll take you and you since you haven't heard it. Go ahead.
So my question is, you said a little bit earlier, you think you see the pendulum kind of shifting back to a belief in science. Pretty much everything you've said since you made that statement has told me the opposite, that we're still not shifting. If anything, because of the internet, it takes one tragic story versus all the science in the world, and the tragic story is going to get equal playtime, and it's going to get equal weight, it's going to get equal strength. That's why television news leads with the human interest story.
If it bleeds,
so what do you see? What do you think is actually making that shift back? Because I'm not seeing it.
Did I say that?
You kind of.
Was I must have been hallucinating. I think that as an electoral issue, the Obama administration has brought reality back, and he has appointed fantastic people to run the scientific agencies without exception, as far as I know. And so that really matters. I mean, we have people running the country now who don't think we should be teaching the alternative to evolution because it would be good to open people's minds to the dinosaur theory. So that'll help. It's not the answer. But so I do think we're moving in that direction. As a society, I'm not sure what direction we're moving in. And it does worry me a lot. OK, last question.
You were saying fear spreads as fast as a virus. Given that fear spreads by telephone and blog, does it spread faster?
How can I get out of this? Yes, but good things also spread faster by telephone and blog. Information, which is basically the best weapon we have against fear, spreads as fast as fear. And I actually think there's more good information than bad information. So I'll leave you with my amazingly upbeat view that I think we can defeat this stuff, but it takes a lot of work. And thank you all for coming.